Yet public health spending remains below 2% of GDP, missing even the government's own promise of 2.5% after COVID. An allocation of over 1 lakh crore to the health ministry may sound impressive, but ambition must be measured in proportion, not in numbers. The consequences are now visible beyond government hospitals. Since 2019, over 600 private hospitals have exited the Ayushman Bharat Jan Arogya Yojana, revealing the fragility of coverage without delivery. Insurance that arrives late is merely distress deferred. Meanwhile, the fundamental determinants of health, clean air, safe water, nutritious food, and mental well-being continue to deteriorate even as disputes rise and mental health indicators worsen. A nation that seeks economic greatness cannot afford to economize on the health of its people. While you propose, Madam, exempting 7 additional rare disease drugs from import duties, your centers of excellence for rare diseases are few, unevenly distributed, and unable to utilize even the insufficient funds allocated, leaving thousands of patients to die every year for lack of treatment. And nowhere is this pattern of neglect more glaring than in the case of the long-promised AIMS in Kerala. First year of the NDA government, the promise was announced. The promise still remains unrealized. A state with one of the strongest public health records in the country continues to wait, while this budget, like its predecessors, offers neither clarity, nor timelines, nor urgency. 22 AIMS have been sanctioned across India, Mr. Chairman, but when it comes to Kerala, the silence is deafening. And AIMS that is not even a dot on a map is not institution building, it is institutional disregard. Kerala does not lack need, capacity, or credibility. What it lacks, it seems, is visibility in this government's priorities. Why, Mr. Chairman, is Kerala invisible to this government? I'd like to know. Equally telling is the silence on air pollution. After months of public outrage and choking headlines, the finance minister's speech found space for everything except the air we breathe. The National Clean Air Programme still runs on 2009 standards, weaker than the WHO's PM 2.5 norms, even as pollution control funding has been cut from 1,300 crores to 1,091 crores this year. A budget that saves on rupees but ignores the air its citizens breathe reduces development to bad arithmetic, not good progress. Mr. Chairman, the announcement of 3 new National Institutes of Pharmaceutical Education and Research, or NIPA, raises a troubling question of balance and intent once again. I'm sorry to return to my state, but Kerala, despite one of the country's strongest public health ecosystems and a proven record in healthcare delivery, once again went unaddressed, even as NIPAs are concentrated and clustered in northern and eastern India, and a single institute in Hyderabad is expected to serve the entire south. This imbalance is not new. I flagged it 2 years ago when I was chairman of the Standing Committee on Chemicals and Fertilizers. At a time when over 60% of India's 8,500 MSME drug units lack support to adopt even good manufacturing practices, such skewed institutional allocation risks shrinking rather than strengthening our manufacturing base. It also does little to reduce our dependence on China for nearly 2/3 of key active pharmaceutical ingredients, or to correct India's anemic R&D investment of just 0.64% of GDP, with even large pharma firms spending under 1% of net sales on their research. The result is predictable: limited innovation, continued reliance on low-cost biosimilars, and life-saving biologics priced far beyond the reach of most Indians, where public health spending remains so much below the GDP target of 2.5%. Without correcting regional imbalance and backing institutions with serious R&D support, this NIPA initiative risks sounding visionary while delivering exclusion. Now, all of these shortcomings in the sectors I've surveyed, in infrastructure, education, healthcare, might have been bearable if at least the economic burden were distributed equitably. But as per the UNDP Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index, India ranks the lowest of all BRICS countries at 130. The silent shock absorbers of this economy are the middle class. They are now cracking under the strain. The symbols of success we see today, smartphones, cars, lifestyle assets, are only sustained by EMIs, Mr. Chairman, for the middle class, leaving the Aam Aadmi little room for health insurance, for savings or medical emergencies. Credit cards are once a luxury or a convenience. They've now become a lifeline. Defaults rose 28% last year to 6,742 crore rupees, not because Indian households are reckless, but because they are running out of room to breathe. With 2.9 lakh crore rupees in outstanding dues and 10.5 crore cards in circulation, borrowing has become the price of staying afloat. Even as households struggle, the tax burden has quietly shifted onto them. Personal income tax now contributes over half of all direct taxes, while the corporate share declines, as I mentioned earlier. And while last year's budget at least acknowledged middle-class housing stress through the Swami Fund, this budget offers only silence. Inflation may look subdued on paper, but for citizens, the cost of living has merely been shifted. When the state fails to provide clean air, safe water, and uncontaminated food, households are forced to buy privately what should be public goods: air purifiers, water filters, basic safeguards. This burden is unequal, Mr. Chairman. The privileged can protect themselves, while the poor remain exposed. A nation cannot grow by exhausting the very people who sustain it. The Aam Aadmi, who are financing this government, are being sent deeply troubling signals on taxation. A one-time concession allowing special economic zone manufacturing units to sell domestically at reduced duties is little more than tokenism when the SEZ ecosystem itself is collapsing, with hundreds of zones shut and employment in free fall. More disturbing still is the withdrawal of income tax exemption on disability pensions for defense personnel. This move weakens social protection for disabled veterans who risk their lives for our country and draws an indefensible line between service-related disabilities and abdication of the state's moral duty to those who have made such sacrifices for the nation. Now, I'd like to acknowledge that amid this disaster and disorder, there has been some measure of fiscal discipline. The fiscal deficit has edged down from 4.5% to 4.4%. Minister speaks of a further reduction to 4.3%, and that sounds reassuring on paper. But I've been in this House long enough, Mr. Chairman, to remember when her predecessor, the late Arun Jaitley, as Finance Minister, set a target of 3.5%. We're nowhere near that benchmark today, yet we seem eager to applaud for settling at a much higher number. Perspective matters, sir, and without it, these figures lose their meaning, especially when they fail the only test that truly counts: whether the Aam Aadmi has more money in his pocket, whether he has wages that keep pace with prices, whether he or she has a life that is becoming easier. Fiscal prudence cannot be celebrated in isolation when household budgets remain under strain and economic security is elusive for millions. In this budget, the Union government has once again doubled down on an infrastructure-led growth strategy, raising capital expenditure to 12.2 lakh crores on the assumption that public capex will crowd in private investment and generate jobs. But this promise has yet to materialize. In fact, it hasn't materialized at all during this government's tenure. Private investment has throughout remained sluggish. Labor-intensive sectors are crowded out by capital-heavy projects. Welfare spending has been compressed, and key subsidies and social sector allocations fall short of stated goals. The burden has increasingly been pushed onto the states without adequate devolution of tax revenue. Meanwhile, unemployment, particularly amongst educated youth, remains distressingly high, and capacity utilization continues to remain below levels that would trigger a genuine private investment cycle. In this context, the Capex-centric approach appears less like a strategy for inclusive growth and more like a gamble that ignores weak demand, joblessness, and the lived economic distress of the ordinary citizen. Mr. Chairman, no nation can develop on slogans or headlines alone. India's investment in research and development remains stuck at 0.6% of GDP. not only below advanced economies, but even below several emerging ones. China invests about 2.4%, Brazil even over 1%, the US 3.5%, South Korea 5% of GDP. A country that aspires to be a manufacturing and knowledge powerhouse cannot afford to treat research and development as an afterthought. I would urge the Minister to elevate R&D as a national priority. Now, on urban cities, on our cities, it should be pointed out that the hesitancy in innovation is reflected in the Smart Cities mission, which has become a reminder of unfulfilled promises. A decade after Smart Cities was announced, deadlines have been repeatedly extended from June 23 to December 25, no real change on the ground. Claims of 96% completion certainly ring hollow for somebody from Thiruvananthapuram or Warangal or Silvassa or Port Blair, because they're all incomplete. Large parts of the Northeast continue to lag, leaving even the Parliamentary Standing Committee unconvinced. Instead of transforming urban life, the mission has largely polished a few elite enclaves, while basic services for millions remain untouched. I can't not mention the new interim trade agreement with the United States, because that has just come out after the minister's speech. It looks less like a free trade agreement than a pre-committed purchase agreement that overturns every principle of reciprocity. How can we speak of a reciprocal tariff of 18% on one side and 0% on the other? At a time when India's total bilateral trade with the US stands at roughly 130 billion US dollars, and we have a trade surplus of only 45 billion US dollars, we have surprisingly promised to buy $500 billion worth of American goods over 5 years. This effectively converts a surplus into a long-term deficit by executive assurance rather than by market demand. No major economy has ever neutralized its own trade leverage in this manner. While the US continues to impose import tariffs of up to 18%, we have committed ourselves, apparently according to this joint statement that I've been seeing here, joint US-India statement, to impose tariffs up to 18% on Indian exports, and we to slash tariffs to near zero levels, open agriculture, dilute data localization, soften intellectual property safeguards, and even redirect strategic energy imports, especially away from Russia, to meet purchase targets. Now, this is not strategic balancing, it is economic preemption. Parliament has neither been told how farmers, MSMEs, and domestic industry will be protected, nor why India has voluntarily surrendered its negotiating power without securing proportional market access. Without securing proportional market access or policy space in return. I know the government will say, wait for the final agreement, it's coming in mid-March, but let them be aware these concerns exist right now, sir. Yes. The government's claim that India has secured a better deal than China, Vietnam, or other Asian economies does not withstand scrutiny. While India has obtained a tariff reduction of 1 or 2 percentage points from them, no East Asian economy has agreed to deliberately dilute its trade surplus with the US through guaranteed purchase commitments. On the contrary, China, Vietnam, and several ASEAN countries have actually expanded their trade surpluses with the US, even amid heightened trade tensions. And this ambiguity, Mr. Chairman, has a direct bearing on the credibility of the budget itself. When both the Minister of Commerce and Industry and the Minister of External Affairs were questioned on these commitments, they were really offered no clear explanation of their scale, timeline, or fiscal implications. Now, the reason I mention this in the context of the budget is that key budgetary assumptions on trade balances, external financing needs, and overall macroeconomic stability rest on information that the Parliament does not possess and has not been given. A budget framed amid such uncertainty is not just incomplete, it asks this House to approve numbers without knowing the obligations that may soon overtake them from this trade agreement. Now, I do want to say that when the two ministers play ping pong with each other, saying it's not in their mandate to answer the question, each one attributes it to the other, then that looks like a rather disappointing game, because when no minister claims ownership of something like this, accountability disappears, and Parliament is left staring at a budget that conceals obligations that the government seems to lack the courage to admit openly. In short, Mr. Chairman, The real weakness of this government's budget lies in its implementation, where rhetoric is not matched by reality. Let me quote that famous verse once again by Mirza Ghalib, which I think perfectly captures our reality today as reflected in this budget and its aspirations. हमको मालूम है जन्नत की हकीकत, हमें मालूम है जन्नत की हकीकत, लेकिन दिल बहलाने के लिए गालिब ये ख्याल अच्छा है. That seems to be what we have had inflicted upon us. We know the reality behind these claims, these tall promises, these narratives of model governance, but they're not policies grounded in outcomes. They're carefully curated illusions. Glossy schemes, utopian projections, they might soothe the imagination, dil to behlata hai, but everyday life for the ordinary citizen of India has remained unchanged. Hope is repeatedly sold, but delivery remains perpetually deferred. Viksit Bharat by 2047 is an admirable ambition, safely more than 2 decades away. This budget offers no credible pathway to reach it. Instead of narrowing the gap, it widens it. Unemployment continues to rise. Poverty hardens. Jobs remain scarce. Wages remain stagnant. Small businesses, already gasping for relief, are smothered under layers of compliance, while informal workers, gig workers who sustain our economy with their labor are pushed further into invisibility and insecurity. Government promises railways, yet stations crumble. They speak of flight, yet Udan has flown away. Our pepper, once celebrated as black gold, withers under neglect. Our long coastline stretches endlessly, but is ignored when it comes to protecting it. Education is curtailed precisely when it should be expanded, while the rhetoric of world-class technology and AI grows louder. 1.5 lakh schools still function without electricity, yet Viksit Bharat is spoken of as if the lights are already on. When vision is severed from reality, it ceases to be aspiration and becomes merely an illusion. A truly Viksit Bharat will not be built on slogans, Mr. Chairman, not built on speeches or symbolism, but on delivery that reaches the last citizen of India. Turning promises into outcomes is not a favor, it is not a choice. It is our kartavya, it is your kartavya, may I say to the government. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Jai Hind.
माननीय श्रीमती अपराजिता सारंगी जी।